If you have any questions, ask me in the chat. I'm going to try to get to them every time in a while, or you can also use the QA button, and I can also, over there, I can see faster if there is something relevant to me. And if you want, you can continue introducing yourself in the chat, those of you who just arrived now, as a way to connect to each other. That's my email, eli@startuplink.com, in case you have questions or want to ask about something specific that we didn't cover, then I'll try to do my best to answer. And the topics for today, we're going to do a quick introduction of our global startup ecosystem rankings. Then after that, we're going to go over the key findings of our global rankings. And then talk a little bit about how you can also help us for the upcoming 2019 rankings that are very, very soon coming. And since this has to do with research and the way that we do research, your feedback will be greatly, greatly appreciated. So in case you have questions about methodology and anything that comes to mind, let me know. It will be helpful in the research that we publish in March 2019. So I want to start with showing you a little bit of what we work on. Basically, this is startuplink.com. It's a global startup ecosystem map and research center. We have tens of thousands of registered startups, co-working spaces, and so on. It gives you a little bit of a graphic view of how the ecosystem looks like in a way. So if you're thinking about relocating to a place, it might be a good resource just to get a feeling for the location and what's going on there. So, and by the way, if you don't have your startup registered on startuplink.com, it would be great if you can add it. There is a green add startup button here. If you have co-working, the same, or accelerator. I know that we have an accelerator from Chicago, I saw that. So basically you just go to the accelerator tab and click on the add accelerator button. The project was featured by a lot of press. You can see here all the logos, so it's well known. Governments are looking at it, especially on the research part of it. So it's a very fun project to work. And other than that, we have 90 communities around the world via Meetup. And probably most of you arrived here via meetup.com. So it's always good to connect and kind of have connections to the entrepreneurs themselves and not just doing the technology and the research. So that's the kind of the fun part. So let's speak a little bit about the importance of startup ecosystems. And the importance is as following. There is very high correlation between economic growth and startup success of a country. So if you look at places like Israel, and Estonia, for example, where I am now, the economic jump actually follows the startup success. So if you have a very good startup ecosystem, you're able to actually create a lot of jobs and create a lot of tax revenue that also makes the country a lot richer. So it makes a lot of sense to have a good startup ecosystem. The second reason of why we would like to work and have a good startup ecosystem is talent. And the idea is that the world is becoming very, very global, and everyone can move around as much as they want, a lot more than before. So in a global world, the best minds will go where they have to go. So the idea is that if there is no good startup ecosystem in one place, you're going to see all the talented people in your city or in your country going somewhere else, which is not advisable in a way for a country or a city. Now, a little bit of something to think about. The most vibrant cities in the world that are considered to be the most fun cities that have great culture and great past life, and people are really enjoying living in those cities. I'm going to give you an example from the top 20 cities that we've located, and some of them you will understand are actually really cool cities. So San Francisco, New York, Berlin, Stockholm, Amsterdam, Paris, London, Beijing, Barcelona, Vancouver, Tel Aviv. So the idea is that startup ecosystems and fun cities get attracted to one each other. So the idea is that it's very likely that if the startup ecosystem in your city is good, it's also a really fun city to live in. And that's something that is pretty substantial. So for all those reasons, a good startup ecosystem can create a giant impact on your life and on your country and on your city as well. So it makes a lot of sense to reach a situation where your startup ecosystem is good. And if it's not good, go to somewhere good. So that's basically a little bit about the conclusions here. Now, the research part of startup ecosystem is very interesting, and that's why we're proud to have the rankings. So governments and municipalities, they should invest more into the creation of a good ecosystem, especially if it's a weak ecosystem. So the idea is that the weaker the ecosystem is, the more governments and municipalities have to allocate resources to promote the ecosystem. So the idea is that you kind of have to ask yourself in your own city, each and every one of you, is my government or my local municipality investing resources in the ecosystem? Because that's the only player that kind of has money in the initial phases. And if they don't really care, then it's a good sign that maybe there is not much hope where you are. So that's something to consider. Good municipalities and governments are investing money, let's say, if they see that there are no co-working spaces or accelerators, or there are zero investor in an ecosystem, they will put the money to bridge the gap and to be in a situation that they are creating the initial seed, and then the market takes care of itself. But if the government does not do that, nothing good can really happen in the initial phase. Now, so for governments, it's very important to know what's the status of their startup ecosystem, and mainly via rankings, knowing comparatively how are you doing in comparison to the other world, to the other cities in the world. Corporates are also very interested in the research, and we see it because a lot of corporates are downloading our research. The reason is that they're thinking about where should we put our next branch? Where should we have our next development center? So the idea is that corporates are looking for talent. And it's a proven fact that where you have a vibrant startup ecosystem, there is tons of talent. And that's exactly what corporates are looking for. And it's also critical for you, the entrepreneur. And I'm going to try to convince you that it's worthwhile to think about your ecosystem a lot more than what we usually do. So the idea is that we as entrepreneurs, we have a feeling that we're very much dependent on ourselves. You know, we're going to go to the office or stay in our room at our home every day and work as hard as possible. And if we're smart and we're making the right decisions, then the startup will be successful. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that because we're not disconnected from the world. So the bottom line is that the city that you pick to run your operation of your startup is very, very critical. It will probably be the reason of success and failure, because good cities and good ecosystems, and you always have to remember that, give you a lot of opportunities. So what do you get in a good startup ecosystem? And over here, each and every one of you kind of have to think if your current ecosystem is doing that. So a good ecosystems, you have investors. And investors are actually very much not appearing in the vast majority of the world. Investors are currently focused at around 25 cities around the world. And that's pretty much it, to be honest. Investors have a tendency to go to the hubs. So if your startup is very much into, let's say, intense capital injection, and you know that you're going to have to raise serious investment, not being in top 20, top 25 cities around the world doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's kind of a warning, because investors are hard to get, especially in remote areas. Now, other good things that happen in startup ecosystem, in good startup ecosystems, is that your clients are going to be there. So it's much easier to connect to your potential clients if you're already in a vibrant and successful startup ecosystem. Your co-founders are going to be there, because in smaller locations, the vast majority of the population is not really interested that much in entrepreneurship. They care more about daily job and so on and so on. So if you're really trying to build a serious team and you want to find the right people, it's very likely that it's going to be much more easy to do that in a place that is a startup ecosystem. Now, good suppliers are also going to be there, the people who give you high quality service. The knowledge is there. So basically, you know, a lot of building a startup is with cutting edge knowledge, and things are changing very, very fast. So you want to be connected to the trends and to the knowledge in your area. And being by yourself, it's very difficult to do it. And the knowledge is flowing a lot better in big startup ecosystems and good hubs, generally via meetups and so on, and events and networking events and so on. So there is a giant advantage in that. And the last thing is the emotional support that a good startup ecosystem can give you as a founder. So basically, building a startup is a difficult task. Also emotionally, because the idea is that you're kind of, you all know the statistics that startups fail 90% of the time. So you're basically doing some kind of an adventure with very high probability of failure. This is stressful. It's very uncertain, and you never know if you can make it or not. So the idea is that if you're in a not startup ecosystem, not a good startup ecosystem, you will probably not have a lot of emotional support from like-minded people. While if you're in a startup ecosystem, you're going to keep on bumping into people that are having exactly the same challenges and fighting exactly the same wars like you. And that's very, very helpful. In smaller locations, you might even, meet your friends and family that are not that much into entrepreneurship, and they're going to tell you, what are you doing? Go back to the 9 to 5, and so on and so on. So there is a very good reason in surrounding yourself with an atmosphere and a social circle of like-minded people when you're actually embarking on the, let's say, entrepreneurial route in a way. So all those things, all those good things that we talked about are happening in startup ecosystems. That's the sad reality. And this is why it's so important to understand that being in a good startup ecosystems makes a lot of sense. So after I hopefully convince you that it's really important to pick the right location, and it's not necessarily the location where you are now, let's move on to the next slide that is basically a little bit of advice for you as entrepreneurs about picking the startup ecosystem and some things that you should think about. So the first thing I would focus on is that the startup ecosystem that you pick for you and for your operations has to adjust and kind of align with your goals. So for example, if you're going to see, let me ask you a bit, for those of you who have not really remembered our table and didn't see the results, what are the top 3 startups ecosystem in the world if you have to guess? By order. So write the first one, the second one, and the third one. Just want to see in the chat who is, if you kind of can guess more or less what are they. So I'm looking forward to hear your, to have a look at your guesses. So the first startup ecosystem, the second, and the third. Just if you would have to guess. So let's see. We have a few brave people that went for it. Okay, so we have San Francisco, New York, and Boston. Then we have San Francisco, Tel Aviv, New York. Then we have San Francisco, London, and New York, and San Francisco and New York. You're good. You're all very, very good. So yeah, the first one without a doubt is San Francisco or Silicon Valley. That's like by a very, very big margin. And the second one, according to what we found, was actually New York. And if I'm not mistaken, the third one would be the third one would be London. If I remember correctly, we're going to go over it together. Joseph is betting for Shenzhen. I heard a lot that we kind of missed Shenzhen. We currently have it at spot 51, so we're probably going to have to fix it. Amsterdam is also relatively high. So yeah, and New Mexico, not really, like not yet, but maybe in the future. I was in Albuquerque. I really like Albuquerque. And Amsterdam is a great startup ecosystem. So the idea is that basically there are many startup ecosystems, and just because San Francisco and Silicon Valley are #1 in the world doesn't mean that basically this is the place that you have to go to. So let me tell you the following. First of all, you have to kind of think about your goals. So if your goal is to build a giant startup that is going to conquer the world, to be the next Facebook or the next Google, you have no other option than picking probably either San Francisco or New York, because that's where actually the big things are happening. So if your goals are to do that, those are good ecosystems. However, if your goals are more, let's say, modest, and you're kind of not interested to change the world, but create a nice business that makes sense and so on, going to places like New York, San Francisco, or London are going to make your life a lot more expensive than what it should be, and it's going to create more pain than benefit. So the idea is that you don't necessarily have to aspire to go to the top startup ecosystem. You always have to align what are the goals that you're trying to achieve in your aspiration, and then align them to the city. So that's one thing to consider. So that means that in some cases, picking a regional hub is sometimes better than a global hub. So let's say you're living currently in
East Europe, in Warsaw, which is a good city, but definitely not a top-tier startup ecosystem. So you might be few steps away from Berlin, which is a great startup ecosystem, or from London, or even Stockholm. So the idea is that it's not necessarily to go to the global hub. You can also go to the regional hub as well. And again, it all has to do with your goals. A good thing about the good startup ecosystems, the expensive one like San Francisco, New York, and London, is that they have a tendency to naturally terminate startups that don't have any sense, because the cost of living is so high that you would not be able to kind of lie to yourself for a long time. So the nice thing about the good ecosystems is that they kill the startups that should not exist in a way. And you can see it because if you are in a place like in San Francisco, it's relatively easy to get investors meetings there. If you're in a situation that you're trying to get investors and you can't for over 3 months, and people don't even accept your, let's say, invitation to meet with them, and so on, then you have a very, very good indication that your startup is not really currently very, very appealing. But if you're in a smaller location, you will never know, because only in hubs you would actually have enough feedback to kind of figure out if you're doing the right thing. Now, what we generally recommend is doing the following. I think that there are two options. Basically, if you're currently in an ecosystem that is not worthwhile, it's kind of like so-so. One of the two things you should consider doing is as follows. The first one is to leave, because there is no real. If you know that your ecosystem is not getting you close um, to achieve your goals, and it's not an optimal ecosystem, and you have the opportunity of going somewhere that is more successful, you should probably do that. The other option that I recommend is consider leading. So becoming a leader of an ecosystem is actually not that difficult. The only thing you have to dedicate is a little bit of your time. You don't need to build everyone's startups. That's not the point. The point is that you just want to become a connector. So how do you become a connector? Generally by creating meetups and just knowing who is doing what, so you can connect them with the resources. So the idea is that there are a lot of prizes of actually becoming a leader of a relatively weak ecosystem, because you're going to be the connector of the ecosystem in a way. But the only thing that I recommend is not to be in a situation that you're in a bad ecosystem, you're not living it, and you're also not leading it, because that's, as far as I'm concerned, not a good optimal solution. In regard of leading an ecosystem, Startup Link itself has a program of community leaders that I'm going to share a link with you later, so it might be interesting for you to check it out. There are many, many other programs as well by other organizations, and you can do it on your own as well. It's really not that difficult. So there are many, many options of how to lead an ecosystem. Now, one more thing to consider is that your industry is also very, very important. So let's say you're building a hardware startup. So in case you're building a hardware startup, although San Francisco is first in the world, some cities are better in hardware, probably not than San Francisco, because it's basically better than anyone else in anything. But the idea is that you should also take into consideration what is your industry. So for example, for a fintech startup, places like London are great. For a B2C startup, business to customer, to consumer, Berlin is great. Zurich and Singapore are great for blockchain because they have good regulation for blockchain. Shenzhen is good for hardware. So the idea is that you also have to take into account not only the general rankings that we're doing, and hopefully in the future we're going to do industry rankings as well, but in addition to that, you also want to take into account basically what is the special force of an ecosystem, and what are the industries that are becoming very, very dominant in that ecosystem. Let's see if there are any questions. Yeah, and Jonathan is saying San Francisco is crazy expensive, and that is exactly the reasons of why if you're not building a massive startup, going to San Francisco would be a little bit suicidal. Joseph is asking who is the top for biotech and health. I honestly don't know. If someone knows the situation in biotech and health, you can let Joseph know in the chat. I would take a bet on San Francisco as well, because when you don't know, the plug number that you always want to use is San Francisco, because things are happening there for sure. Good. So
Yeah, Jay, you're actually right. I remember now that a lot is going on in Boston with those fields as well. So yeah, great. So wow, it seems like we have experts in ecosystems. That's really good to see. So let's speak a little bit about the annual rankings that we do, and we're going to publish the next one in March. We're really excited about that to see how things are going to change from the previous rankings. So what we're basically doing and what we're doing that is very different than other rankings is that we are ranking hundreds of locations. We're ranking about 1,000 cities. So we're not really publishing the top 20 list or whatever because we have a feeling everyone knows what is the top 20 list. The more interesting thing is actually to go on 1,000 locations and see where is the capital of Lithuania, where is the capital of Finland, and so on. Where are the small cities in Finland and Lithuania located, and so on and so on. What we do is that we use the data and the technology and the communities that we have. We built an algorithm, mathematical algorithm that processes tens of thousands of points and basically get to the results that I'm going to show you soon. I just want to say that our methodology is basically we're kind of avoiding from developing very, very complicated models that have a lot of assumptions. So for example, low cost of living, is it good for an ecosystem or not good? I don't know. We just talked about it, that actually, if it's an expensive place, it will flush out all the bad startups out there. So it's not necessarily a good thing to have low cost. Is immigration, flexible immigration, good for an ecosystem or not good? Again, I don't know. Education levels, cost of life, and so on and so on. So the idea is what we're checking is the situation on the ground as it is, which basically means the following. I'm going to show you what are the main parameters. So basically, we're checking, first of all, the quantity. How many are there? And by saying how many are there, I mean startups, and I mean co-working spaces, and I mean accelerators. Each of them is calculated in a different way. Then we actually also check the quality, the average quality of a startup in each location. And the idea is to check where are the unicorns. Unicorns are startups that are valued over $1 billion. And we have a few integrations, for example, with SimilarWeb, to be in a situation that we can kind of reach conclusions about how popular also those startups are in each location, so we can have an estimation on the quality of the startups. And then the last thing that we do is we are checking the business environment. That means if a city or a country has a critical mass of startups and co-working and accelerator, doing business indexes and so on, and then we just put everything together, run an algorithm, and get the results. Just want to say a little bit about the traction that we had so far. So as for the traction, the report is being downloaded by many thousands of entrepreneurs, government officials, universities, organizations. We're being invited to a lot of conferences. I was just giving a speech in OECD forum in Lisbon and in Estonia after visiting after being invited to a forum by the Russian government. So governments are very, very interesting in rankings because it helps them to kind of understand the current status. So we had dozens of press mentions, a lot of government mentions. This one that you see over here is from Canada's science minister that was happy that Canada is ranked number 3 in the world currently, according to our research in the countries. And we also onboard ecosystem partners in various countries already to whom we are helping with startup ecosystem development. Usually it's government organizations, accelerators, and so on, that we are working together with them to feature their startup ecosystem and give them tools to develop it. That's a little bit about the traction. And now this thing is basically showing you the ranking tables like a sample, how they look like. While showing you that, so basically you can have a very quick look. So you can see the countries and the cities here. And while telling you that, I'm going to try sharing my screen just to show you a little bit about what you can do with the tables so you can browse them a little bit later. So just a second. Ron, I'm just going to try answering a question from Ron that he's asking me. Basically, startups do not have money, so when is a good time to make a transition to an expensive city? So exactly what you said. The good time to make a transition is when you can, first of all, or when you understand that there is no other option than making the transition right now. So the idea is that, let's say if you're starting in a smaller city, let's say in Albuquerque, in New Mexico. So you can be there until a few things can happen. One, you're starting to get a lot of traction. You're starting to get a lot of sales, and then you tell yourself, look, I'm going to have to move from Albuquerque to San Francisco or New York because that's the places where I can hire a really good team and get a great investment. So this is a good scenario that you basically built yourself and you're going to a more prosperous place. The other scenario that I see as well is that you're working on something and you see that you can't do it without investors and you have only 3 months of money. And you're basically saying, you know what, I'm going to San Francisco. Let's say you have 6 months of money, so it's not too late. I'm going to San Francisco and I'm going to have only 3 months of money when I'm in San Francisco because it's so expensive, but I'm taking my chances, like to try to save the startup. So those are kind of two situations in which you can kind of be in a situation that you will have to transition. Now I'm going to quickly share my screen with you and kind of show you the what you can do with the ranking and where can you see it, because you're probably only interested more than anything in your city. So let me have a quick look. So good. Can you see my screen with, just a second, I'm going to reload the map. Let me know when you can see the map, and then I'm going to show you a quick tutorial of how to use the rankings. Good. So you should be able to see it. Can you confirm in the chat that you can see the map? Excellent, great. So that's basically our map. Over here, you can look for a specific location. If you're looking to zoom in the location, you can switch between co-working, accelerators, startups. Then you can also check industries after you choose startups. That's where you add your startup. You click on the ecosystem ranking or just scroll down, and those are basically the rankings. Over here, you have a few options. The notable ones are to switch from countries to cities. So let's say I click it, and now it's going to show me the countries. And the second one is to download our report if you're interested to go even deeper into the methodology. And you can search. So let's say you're specifically interested about, let's say, Germany. So you can go to the search box, search for Germany. And over here, you can see that it shows you only the German cities. So Berlin is number 5 in the world. Munich is 64 in the world, Hamburg 74, and Frankfurt 84, and so on and so on. And you can see there are many, many locations. But the accuracy does tend to decrease the more you go down, because there is less information about those ecosystems. That's basically the way that you're using this resource. So for you, it would be interesting maybe to test it later and kind of see where is your, or even now, and kind of see where is your startup currently located. So let me just quickly go to where we stopped with the. Okay, good. So that's basically it. You can see here a little bit of the conclusions of the top 15, and hopefully your city and your country are on the top 15 locations. Let's talk a little bit about the main conclusions or key takeaways that we had from the results. So basically, the first key takeaway is that a lot of people are saying, hey, the USA is decreasing and it's losing its impact. According to our research, it's really not true. The USA is simply another league, especially San Francisco. It's like a supernova. You can have a look at the ranking tables and you can see the margins 3 times more than London and 10 times more than, 3 times more than New York and 10 times more than London. So it's like a giant difference. It's going to take a lot of time for anyone to even consider closing. Other than that, the USA is strong by diversity. Almost a third of the top 50 cities in the world are USA cities. So it shows you the dominance of the USA basically in the global startup ecosystem. A few good news. Small countries can have a very, very successful startup ecosystem. So in the top 20 countries, you can see Israel at number 4, Sweden, I think 7, Switzerland Denmark, Singapore, Estonia, where I am now, Ireland, and Finland. So it's very interesting to see that even small countries that would be considered to be underdogs, if they have the right policy and the right people, they can actually make it to become a serious hub. We also noted that native English-speaking countries have an advantage in the global startup ecosystem. So the top three countries for us are United States, United Kingdom, and Canada. All of them are native speakers of English. And the other countries that are very much after them have really good level of English usually. So knowing English really helps a lot to connect to the global startup ecosystem. That's kind of a fact that we have to accept. Europe is doing very, very well in our rankings. 20 European countries, including Russia. So maybe some of you are not going to accept this definition of geography, and including the UK as well. That might not be Europe soon. But the idea is that currently 20 European countries are in the top 30 countries, which shows you that Europe has a lot of diversity and very good, successful startup ecosystems in big numbers. Other than that, Asia is also doing very well. The first one in Asia is Singapore at number 10, closely followed by China at number 12. And China is going to keep on increasing. There is nothing that can stop it. China is doing amazing steps in improving its startup ecosystems. Then you have South Korea at 17th. And Japan at number 20. Japan is a little bit disappointing. I was sure it's going to be higher, but it's not what it used to be in the 80s. But I'm expecting a comeback anytime soon. And let's talk a little bit about the disappointing startup ecosystems as far as we've seen. So Latin America in general doesn't seem to live to its potential. The potential there is absolutely amazing. But the first country that ranks in Latin America is Mexico in Central America. Then you have Chile at 33, Mexico at 30, Brazil 39, and Argentina at 40. So those four countries, especially the size of Mexico and Brazil and Argentina, should have ranked them higher. But apparently there are some problems there that do not really allow them to be in the top 20. And it's relatively lagging behind. Another continent lagging behind is Africa, with only 4 representatives in the top 60 countries. South Africa is currently the most successful ecosystem in Africa, number 38. Then you have Kenya, Egypt, and Nigeria, at all of them between 50 and 60. So Africa is also lagging a little bit behind. Let me quickly go to the chat to see if... So Sunil is asking about India and Bangalore. I think Bangalore is doing very, very well at number 21 in the cities. India, from what I remember, is at number 37. There was a big story in Tech Magazine, your story about that, and people were not so happy, but that's currently the situation. There is a lot more potential than results. However, I can tell you, keep it between us, that on the next rankings from the initial tests that we've done, there is a good reason to believe that India is going to do a lot better, because in the last few years, very good steps are being taken in India, and it's very evident that it's gonna move forward. Sydney is relatively down, but I think Australia is at around 12. So the thing is that in some countries, you can see that the cities are not that, let's say, they have not really built a giant hub, but there is a very good diversity. And I think in Australia as well, you can see a lot of startups in both Sydney and Melbourne as well, which is a good news, because in places like the UK, everything is London. And you see London at number, if I'm not mistaken, number 3 in the world, and then the UK number 2, but then the second English city is Manchester, which is number 98. So the idea is that it's not a healthy situation, according to what I think, to have a mega ecosystem, mega city, while all the other cities are lagging behind. So for example, the UK has a little bit of a problem that everything is really happening in London, and it's not necessarily a healthy situation. In Australia, it's more healthy with a better distribution. Okay, Yalim is asking about Turkey. I don't really remember. I think Turkey is another case of amazing potential that could have been much better result if policies would have been in the right track. But I know of a lot of entrepreneurs in Turkey, and I'm speaking with a few of them, so it's always great to see innovation from there. But I think that currently the momentum is not that positive. Alvidas is asking about Luxembourg. You can check, but basically Luxembourg is ranked very, very low because we had a problem of data. But what happened 2 months ago is that we have a new community leader that joined us in Luxembourg, and he was feeding a lot of data into Luxembourg. So I'm kind of expecting to see a serious jump in Luxembourg. We had a problem because it's a very, very small country, and we didn't have a big enough of a sample. Great. And if people can help the people that are asking specifically about industries, that would be great because I have less of this knowledge. So I see a question from Sunil and so on and so on. Eduardo is asking about Sweden. Sweden is doing absolutely great. I think Sweden is number 6 in the world or 7 in the countries, and Stockholm is in the top 10. So it's a beautiful startup ecosystem according to our ranking. Okay, so let's see. And you have great startups in Sweden as well, Spotify and all the guys. So it's pretty cool. Okay, so we talked about the main takeaways, and let's talk a little bit about the future and what are the upgrades that we're thinking about doing. So first of all, we're going to do in the next ecosystem rankings analysis of trends. So for the first time that's going to be our second report, so we can see how countries are moving either down or up in the ranking. There's going to be more information per country in the reports. We're going to do more integrations on data to improve the accuracy per country and city. And there's going to be more case studies on the partnered cities. So now we have partners joining us, government organizations and so on, so we can do deeper case studies about specific ecosystems that will be featured in the report. Let's talk a little bit about how you can help us and help your country and city rank maybe higher. So first of all, why should you help us with the research? First of all, I think that we all have to understand that if our startup ecosystem grows, basically also our startup will grow. It will simply have more power because it will be fueled by a stronger ecosystem. The second thing to remember is that a little bit of patriotism is not that bad. So you kind of want your city and country to rank higher. So more and more good people are going to stay without leaving, and more good people are going to arrive from other places to your city and your country because it's going to be considered much, much better. So how can you help? So if you're building a startup or building a co-working space or what have you, consider adding it to the map because the algorithm is taking into account the entities, the sample that we have on the map. So if you add your startup or co-working space or accelerator on the map, that's going to do a very big contribution. The other thing you can do is try finding the 10 top startups in your city that are not there and add them, because the top ranked startups are really, really going to make even a bigger impact than the regular startup. So adding those guys makes a lot of sense. Other things that you can consider doing is maybe join the inner circle that we have, just like the leader that I told you about in Luxembourg. We have a community leader project, and basically I'm going to share a link with you that you might find interesting. So if you're really, really interested in the research and so on, I sent you a link now to the community leaders project. If you're working in a government or municipality or a startup organization, then you can always try and connect with us and become a startup ecosystem partner. So I'm sending you, this is the link that I'm going to send you now. And one more interesting thing that you might want to consider is writing an article about your startup ecosystems. Our articles are ranking very, very high. So we're going to send you an email after the webinar tomorrow, hopefully. And if you're interested in writing an article about your city or your country, we would love to have it. So I'm sending a quick link to the section of the reports that we have now that you can check out and maybe write an article if you feel like. So those are kind of the ways to help. Let's see. Thank you. So I think that's pretty much it. What we're going to do now, I'm going to go back to the map. I'm going to share my screen. This is my email again. If you have any questions, you want to ask about something, feel free, add your startup link, and we're gonna do a quick maybe share screen just on the map, and you can type me whatever questions you might have, and we'll try to answer. And yeah, and thanks a lot for arriving today. It was a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in our next webinars.